We also want to address the Iranian threat to launch a significant. They're threatening to launch a significant attack on Israel. As I told Prime Minister Netanyahu, our commitment to Israel's security against these threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. Let me say it again, ironclad. We're going to do all we can to protect Israel's security.
Ironclad, says the President of the United States of America. Almost, it certainly seems something close to whatever the Israeli president wants, or the Israeli prime minister, or the leadership. That's what they're going to get. It almost doesn't seem to matter too much about American national interest, or at least it hasn't so far. We're going to take a look at that today and find out, what does ironclad actually mean in terms of policy, because subsequent comments by the president indicate that there are some limits to it. Thankfully, well, hopefully that there's going to be some more. But to try and break all this down, we have absolutely the best, greatest source we could possibly have, and that's Ambassador Chaz Freeman, whose credentials and credibility and track record are almost peerless in the Western world today. And we're privileged to have you on. Thanks for coming on today, Ambassador.
Great to be here. I might even inhale that flattery.
Well, and it's not enough, I assure you. I undersold it probably. But listen, well, let's just try to exploit that knowledge bank that you have here. And I want to look at that first of all, just before we get into some things that have been happening in recent days. When you hear President Biden, and that statement, by the way, was before the Iranian response on, I think it was the 13th, he just kind of categorically said that, we have Israel's back or whatever. It also came on the tail end of some pretty significant statements against the Israeli government for their conduct of the war in Gaza and their threat to go into Rafah on an offensive, etc., which we haven't heard much since that time. But when you hear him say this kind of ironclad statement, what do you think that means in terms of policy?
Well, I think it means giving Israel the same blank check we've given it for decades. If you give someone an ironclad assurance that no matter what they do, you're going to back them, then they do whatever the hell they want. And that is exactly how this round of problems began. We never called for restraint in Gaza. We are now calling for restraint on Israeli retaliation against Iran. We did not condemn the Israeli assault on the Iranian embassy in Damascus. We denounced the Iranian right to self-defense in response to it. So we have got ourselves in a real bind. Mr. Biden requires domestic political campaign contributions to win re-election, which I doubt he is going to be able to do. But that imperative overrides any concern for international law and decent behavior abroad. The sanctity of embassies is something that's over 3,000 years old. It is in an international convention called the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. If an American embassy had done to it what the Iranians had done to theirs in Damascus, you can be damn sure the United States would pull out all the stops in retaliation. Now, the fact that Iran did not do that, Iran very carefully calibrated a response in order to ensure that the war did not widen. Once it did what it did, it said, that's enough, we're not doing any more. And now we're all on tenterhooks wondering whether Israel, having been given a blank check by Mr. Biden, will once again cash that check in the form of doing something that widens the war. After all, Mr. Netanyahu has spent the last 35 years trying to get the United States to attack Iran. That's why he attacked the embassy in Damascus. Yeah. It didn't work to the Biden administration.
At least it hasn't so far.
Not so far,
Gary, because I want to address that issue there about the view from the U.S. About that Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy on April the 1st. Gary, if you could you pull up that statement we had from Rep. Scalise a couple of days ago? If you can try and get that ready to go up, because we've got something else, something that Blinken also said here, which kind of shows this pattern, this really odd pattern of saying, not almost, it's portraying as though that didn't even happen. Because this particular one here, where Scalise came out after the very limited response that you just talked about, where he says the House of Representatives stands strongly with Israel and there must be consequences for this unprovoked attack. And for anybody who's not been paying a whole lot of attention, and frankly, that's a lot in the United States, they will read that and they probably think, oh, wow, here it is. Because we have always known that Iran was the bad guy, that they were always nefarious and they live in a tough neighborhood. And then you have Secretary of State Blinken saying this yesterday.
As President Biden underscored to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the U.S. is committed to Israel's defense. And I think what this weekend demonstrated is that Israel did not have to and does not have to defend itself alone when it is the victim of an aggression, the victim of an attack.
When it is the victim of an aggression and an attack, I have no words. Hopefully you have some.
Well, Israel is always comfortable, never comfortable when it isn't the victim. And I have to say, we apparently consider everything that happens in the world unprovoked. Nobody ever bears any responsibility for it, except whoever carries out the thing that we object to. That attack on the embassy was an egregious violation of international law. And as I said, if it had happened to us, we would have done something far more than what Iran did. So now we are waiting to see what the bunch of crazy people in the Israeli cabinet come up with by way of a response. And Israelis I think, are seriously divided. The politicians, especially the gang of fascists in the cabinet, whose names you know, are all in favor of massive retaliation against Iran. But I think the military and intelligence people understand that what Iran just demonstrated with an attack modeled on the lessons of the war in Ukraine, three-tier, slow drones, followed by cruise missiles, followed by ballistic missiles, timed all to arrive together. What Iran just showed, Iran poked a finger at Israel. The next time it's going to be a fist. And they just showed that they can saturate Israel's defenses. They didn't have to provide 72 hours advance notice of what they were going to do. They very clearly wanted Israel to shoot down the drones and cruise missiles, and they aimed only at military targets. They did not aim at any civilian target. We don't know how much damage they did to the two air bases they hit, or the intelligence headquarters they hit, but they were very careful and precise. So,
by the way, just some information I got literally just before we came on air here from some satellite imagery that's now starting to come out, is that it appears that the message was even more sophisticated than what you have portrayed so far, in that apparently some of these high precision missiles did get through the Iron Dome on that air base, and they hit a couple of really meaningless targets out there, bypassing some big targets they could have hit, one of which was the swimming pool at apparently the officers club, as I understand. Almost to say, hey, we could have taken all of these important things out, but we went after the swimming pool and an outhouse of some sort, a storage shed of no report. So it seems to me that they're saying we can hit what we want, but we have chosen not to kill anyone or hit anything of any substance so far.
That's exactly correct. And I understand that they actually informed the Israelis that they would be hitting the air base so that the F-35s, which had carried out the attack on Damascus, could be relocated. So this was purely a symbolic, performative act. And it is very significant because up to now, Iran has not responded to Israeli provocations. I think there are now 17 Iranian generals who've been assassinated by the Israelis. The number may not be correct, but Iran has not responded in kind to anything. The most it has done on occasion is agitate some of its clients in the region, proxies, if you will, to take limited actions against Israel. It has not done anything direct. Now the question is, there are two questions. One, if Israel does in fact retaliate against Iran, will Iran next time, instead of sending 300 drones and a handful of cruise missiles and a small number of ballistic missiles, send some of the 10,000 drones that it has and the others, and use the more sophisticated weapons that it has? It basically did not use its most sophisticated weapons in this attack. And the second question is, if Israel continues to assassinate Iranian scientists, engineers, military officers, and political leaders, will Iran engage in counter-assassination? It has not done so. But I think now the question is, the gloves are off, and Israel brought this about. We will see what the consequences are.
Well, there was some news out of Iran this morning where, and I forget the leader, I didn't write it down, unfortunately, said that if there's a subsequent attack from Israel, that the response would be 1,500 drones and missiles in response to your point exactly here. But also to your point about where the thinking and the thought process is among the Israeli leaders. Here is Hagari talking about what may come. And note this almost looks like a scene from a movie. It's kind of surreal, but check this out.
Iran is the world's biggest state sponsor of terror. Its network of terror doesn't just threaten the people of Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. The regime in Iran fuels the war in Ukraine and beyond. Iran will bear the consequences for choosing to escalate the situation any further. Israel is on high alert. We have increased our readiness to protect Israel from further Iranian aggression. We are also prepared to respond. The Israel Defense Forces prepared for all scenarios, and we will take the necessary steps, together with our allies, to protect the people of Israel.
So now, especially,
I want to make a point here.
Sure.
In order to defend Israel against what was a purely symbolic assault intended to hurt nobody, Israel had to mobilize all its forces, go on alert, panic the population overnight, and draw on the full strength of the United States, the United Kingdom, and the intelligence support of Arab countries whose territory these drones were crossing. You think we can, if it is 1,500 missiles next time, you think we can do it again and it'll be effective? I don't think so. So let me make another point, and that is, this is clearly a case of the pot calling the kettle black. Israel rules by terror. It is terrorizing Gaza. It is terrorizing the Palestinian population in the occupied West Bank. It continuously attacks and terrorizes its neighbors, Syria, Lebanon, even Iraq in the past.
Yeah.
So this is just an empty statement. Finally, I would note that Iran has said it does not intend to carry on with this war. So the business of Israel saying it will respond to what? Is Iran going to do anything? They've made it very clear over the past years, and certainly over the almost 7 months of the atrocities in Gaza, that they don't want a wider war. They've done everything possible to restrain their clients from initiating attacks on Israel that would widen the war. Now, the one exception is Yemen, which has undertaken a blockade of the Red Sea against Israeli assets and those protecting them, namely our Navy and the British Navy. But the Houthis are very independent-minded people. They're not stooges. And they have done that for their own reasons having to do with Arab politics. So I think it's good that Israel's on alert, but it's, I think there's a fundamental issue here, which I have to raise as a military man. You may have a comment on this. I think it is a huge mistake to evaluate the use of weaponry in terms of the amount of destruction it wreaks. That weapons are tools to change men's minds. If they don't change men's minds, if the result is not reflected in changes in policy or behavior, then the destruction is for nothing. So we have a habit, because of our highly militarized foreign policy, of imagining that destroying, blowing up a building or something is, that's the end of the story. No, it is not. And what the Iranians have just shown us is that a show of force, which is essentially what they conducted, an active show of force, can be very effective. What do you think the attitude in the ordinary Israeli is now, if they glom onto the fact that they're vulnerable, not just to Hezbollah, which they've known, not just to jihadis, which they've known, but to a great power in the Middle East that has now shown that it is willing to respond to Israeli provocations in kind? I think this is psychologically debilitating for Israel. And the fact that Mr. Biden says we have Israel's back with an ironclad guarantee is not much solace for Israelis.
Yeah.
We turned up when we had to. We did what we said we would. That's to our credit. But our capabilities are not infinite, and we've just been shown the limits. What is required to defend Israel against 1,500 missiles as opposed to 300 is beyond our capability.
Well, and here actually is the Israeli chief of staff, the three-star general, who's putting out his own statement about how Israel should be calm.
Iran's attack has created new opportunities for cooperation in the Middle East. We are closely assessing the situation. We remain at our highest level of readiness. Iran will face the consequences for its actions. We will choose our response accordingly. The IDF remains ready to counter any threat from Iran and its terror proxies as we continue our mission to defend the State of Israel.
Now let me ask you what your thoughts are on this, because it appeared to me that Netanyahu ordered the striking of the Iranian embassy because he expected them to respond the way we would, or that they would probably, if the same thing happened, something that would be big, so that then he could launch a strike into Iran and have the cover from doing that. And since Iran didn't play ball and didn't do their part to help him out, now that all of a sudden it's a lot harder, and you had President Biden come out and say, we will not participate in any offensive action over there. So now it seems like that they're stuck. The general here was talking about what they would do, and he was a much tamer than what the response was talked about before. What do you think the decision-making process is within Israel right now between those two camps you mentioned earlier, and what do you expect they may do instead?
Well, I mentioned that Mr. Biden has a dilemma. He needs domestic political contributions that are dependent on his support for Israel. On the other hand, he can't have a wider war. And he might well get one because Mr. Netanyahu wants one. Mr. Netanyahu cannot stay in office if there isn't a wider war. He is on his last legs politically. I thought that the General Halevi's statement was in fact a reassurance, a necessary counter to the psychological impact on Israelis that I mentioned. This was a very tense weekend. He didn't issue any direct threats. He was very coy about how Israel would respond. I felt it was a measured statement, and I think it reflects awareness on his part and other intelligent Israeli military people that they're now in a different ball game than the one they were. They had a free hand to do whatever they wanted in the Middle East, and they did it. And finally, their string is run out, and they are now faced with the prospect of retaliation, not just by Iran, but by Iran's clients like Hezbollah. So Israel has to be cautious in a way that it never was in the past. And I heard that in the general statement. I think that's actually very realistic on his part. And I suspect that Mossad and Shin Bet understand the stakes very well.
So, what do you think is going to happen now? Because Yoav Gallant came out shortly after all this happened and said, "Well, there." Even after Biden had said that, he said, "Well, we're still going to do something. We're going to." He kind of was again kind of coy about what it was, but that there was going to be something. Can Netanyahu afford to do nothing?
No, I don't think he can. I think he has to do something. I want to go back, however, to General Halevi's statement, because he talked about this as an opportunity for new cooperation in the Middle East. One of the things that is happening in our media spin, if you will, is this business of cooperation with Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and others in the defense of Israel. I think we need to understand what the Saudis and others did was pass intelligence. What they also did was condemn the Israeli assault on the Iranian embassy. They did not condemn the Iranian assault on Israel. So I think this is this business of, well, we can ignore the Palestinian problem, keep going with the massacres in Gaza, and it won't have any consequence for our general foreign policy. One thing that has happened is that attention has temporarily been taken off Gaza. And while it's been taken off Gaza, the Israelis are shooting anybody who tries to get back into northern Gaza. And they are still holding up aid at the border, slow rolling the trucks. So while the world's attention is on this crisis, which Israel caused with its attack on the embassy, they're continuing to do nasty stuff, genocide, if you will, in Gaza. And the other angle here mentioned by by Agari was the connection to Ukraine. Ukraine is beside itself. The U.S. just came to Israel's help in a way that it's refused to do for Ukraine. And we've got now Mr. Johnson, the Speaker of the House, moving various bills through the Congress separately, but maybe all to be combined when they go to the Senate. We don't know whether Ukraine's going to get aid. If it does, it's probably too late at this point. I suspect that the usual forces will ensure that Israel gets a lot of money, even though a great part of the public now is against that. The American elite is not.
Right.
So this is very complicated, both in terms of what's going on in the region and what's going on in our politics and what's going on elsewhere in the world, like Ukraine. You can bet, and I've actually seen comments by the People's Liberation Army, that they're going to study what Iran just did, which was I think, a near pitch perfect demonstration of a use of a show of force. Didn't hurt anybody except one Bedouin girl who got hit with some shrapnel. It didn't attack any populated area in Israel, only military bases. It was politically very carefully choreographed, and it was preceded by a lot of information sharing. I see the White House is denying that they got information about where the attacks were going to be aimed and the timing. Well, of course they didn't get that. I mean, the Iranians gave everybody 72 hours they're going to do something, but they didn't say precisely what they would do, any more than we would if we were mounting an attack on someone. They gave the Israelis and us enough information to ensure that we were able to defend against it. By the way, they probably collected a hell of a lot of intelligence on where radar systems are and dome emplacements are, and Patriot missiles are. And one of the most impressive things about this is that the ballistic missiles, which got through the Patriots, the Iron Dome is irrelevant for them, they seem to have been terminally guided. That is, they conducted evasive maneuvers at the last minute as they struck the swimming pool and other targets at the bases. So this is an impressive demonstration of precision missilery. And I think, if I were sitting in Israel, I would be a little shaken by this.
Well, and I think that's probably, I think that is the case. But here's the question, though. What can Netanyahu do that's not going to prompt that response from Iran that they were talking about, but it's big enough to keep him out of hot water? Because if he promises something and delivers absolutely nothing, and nothing happens after this Iranian strike, then I think that his position gets really weak. And I think to forestall that, he has to do something. But I don't have a good sense for what it is, and I wonder if you do.
I think he'll try to strike some of Iran's so-called proxies. If I were in Yemen, I'd be concerned about Israel reaching out and touching me. In other words, I'd do something that would reassure the public that I'm still savage and competent and responding on behalf of the Israeli state, but something that doesn't directly provoke Iran. I imagine there are quite a number of options in that regard. I hope that for once, Mr. Netanyahu will actually heed President Biden's admonitions to be restrained.
Yeah.
But there's very little hope of that. He has a long-standing habit, whenever Biden asks him to do something, of giving Biden and the United States the finger.
Right.
And I suspect he's probably going to do that again.
Well, and he does have some encouragement. In fact, there is one particular American that has been very kind to offer some suggestions for what Netanyahu can do, as opposed to striking the Houthis or anybody else proper. And well, I'll let him speak for himself.
In today's world, the Gulf Arab states view the United States as weak and feckless. Iran now faces a potential Israeli strike in response to what happened last night. I think it's imperative that Israel strike decisively, not proportionately, disproportionately, to reestablish deterrence and to convince the terrorist proxies that Iran has set up in its Ring of Fire strategy that they're not intimidated.
Disproportionate. That's what it. No chicken hawks. And subsequent to that interview, that clip we showed there, he specified go after the Iranian nuclear sites. That'll solve all the problems and reestablish deterrence. Do you think he's right?
One wonders where he gets his information. There are 200 different sites in Iran connected with the nuclear program. By the way, our intelligence community and the Israeli intelligence continue to say that there is no nuclear bomb program, no evidence of it. What there is evidence of a desire to acquire latency, meaning the ability to build a bomb if a decision to do that is made. But there's no evidence of any such decision. So this is a ridiculous notion. 200 sites, many of them deep underground. And you think Iran's going to do nothing in response? You think the world's going to think that was justified? The biggest loser in all of this, other than the state of Israel, which has seen its reputation trashed by its actions in Gaza, here we have the people who had been exploiting their victim status from the Holocaust, conducting their own Holocaust, doing it live on TV. Israel is now a pariah. The United States has lost huge prestige. When we went in a Security Council and vetoed the condemnation of the attack on the embassy, where we veto ceasefires in Gaza, we look like patsies. Mr. Bolton ought to worry about how we look to the world, not just to Israel. I think the political damage of the idiotic policies we're following in the Middle East, we're handing the keys to a car to a drunk, and we don't know what Israel's going to do. And it has a habit of doing things and telling us as it does them or afterwards.
Right.
So this is not good.
And in fact, there was a statement by President Raisi of Iran talking about what they might do coming up if Israel does do something else. He says right there, it would be a massive, widespread, and painful response against all perpetrators. Now, here's one of the concerns, and colleague of yours and mine, Doug McGregor, has published a piece in the American Conservative really kind of speculating if these things do expand beyond, if Netanyahu does take more provocative action, and then if Iran does start taking some of these actions back and seriously causing harm to to Israel, that then would Israel use its nuclear weapons against Iran? Because this is maybe only 2 steps away. If Iran starts to do that, where they literally strip away the air defense capacity, and all of a sudden they're vulnerable to all kinds of attacks, almost the only thing they have left that can restore that quickly is a nuclear device. Do you think that is outlandish, that there's no chance for that?
No, I don't. I don't think it's outlandish. There are Israeli politicians advocating that. Israel is in the peculiar position of not admitting that it has nuclear weapons, but boasting about them, about having them. And it gets away with this. And I think, yes, if the Israeli state is in grave danger, there is what they call the Samson option. Samson pulled down the Philistine temple around him rather than submit. And I think the Israeli nuclear program, which is, was the Israelis suspect Iran is doing what they did. I mean, that is the basis for their apprehensions about Iran. Namely, they covertly developed nuclear weapons while lying to everybody about what they were doing. I wouldn't put that past the Iranians at all, but there's no evidence that that's what they are doing. Still, if Israel feels that its existence is in jeopardy, I think it will use nuclear weapons. That's the purpose for which it developed them. And it has basically taken the view that if we go, everybody else in the world is going to go with us. All you goyim, all you non-Jews, you're going to get it because you're all anti-Semites now to get us, and so it's entirely appropriate to do that. So there is that mentality there, and it is dangerous. But then the question comes, why have we tolerated that? We tolerated that, including the theft of the original uranium from our own facilities in Pennsylvania. That's where the original supplies came from. And we have a government that every time anybody says, well, Israel has nuclear weapons, they say, shh, don't talk about that. That is not an effective policy. And we are now, as Doug, I guess, has suggested, I haven't read his piece, we are now in danger of seeing the chickens come home to roost on this.
Yeah, that's kind of the gist of what he's talking about, is that the risk exists, and he's just saying out loud what most of Washington is just whispering about behind the scenes, that it is a real possibility. He doesn't make a call on what the percentages are, only that it does exist. And one wonders if that Israeli general that we put up there a minute ago is aware of these things and the catastrophic state that would happen if they take too strong of action against Iran, and they do prompt that sort of response from Iran, that would put them in a position to either make that call or to allow themselves to be, bombed like that. And I hope that they're talking to their policy makers on this.
I suspect he knows that very well. I have a lot of respect for military judgments about the consequences of using force. There's nobody as bloodthirsty as a civilian policymaker. Generally speaking, the military, who understand that they and their comrades could well die as a result of the use of force, are much more cautious. And General Halabi has a responsibility for defending the state of Israel. And I think he takes that responsibility seriously. So I think the military in Israel have always been a force for restraint in terms of the civilians' desire to strike Iran. This has been the case for decades, and I don't have any reason to believe it has now changed. What has changed is the level of the response, as President Raisi said in the clip that you put on, or the picture you put on the slide. The level of response from Iran is now going to be proportionate, as opposed to restrained or indirect. Now, I raised a question earlier, and I raise it again. If Israel continues to murder people in Iran, assassinate them, will Iran now retaliate in kind? I think that's an open question.
Yeah, it is. They've shown great restraint so far because they don't want a war. They don't want to spread it into it. So there's some sanity there, and we hope that we can continue to count on that. But time's only going to tell. And I think everything is going to depend on what Netanyahu does, and I hope he takes that off ramp that you were talking about before. In the last few minutes that we have here, I want to play you a clip that's troubling in a different direction from the home front. Now, at the Golden Gate Bridge here, I believe over the weekend, there was some protest where people were saying, hey, protest for the people of Palestine. They want to bring more food in, that kind of thing. And it got a lot of press because it shut down the Golden Gate Bridge. And in response, Senator Tom Cotton made some really strange comments that I want to get your views on. Gary, go ahead and roll that.
Feel very deeply for all those people who are trying to get to work or trying to pick up a kid. Very worried about the diversion of police resources when it needs to be stopping crime in cities like San Francisco, where firefighters are having to go there when they might have calls for fires out. I have to say, Sandra, I agree with you that you have to get to these criminals early. If something like this happened in Arkansas on a bridge there, let's just say I think there'd be a lot of very wet criminals that have been tossed overboard, not by law enforcement, but by the people whose road they're blocking. If they glued their hands to a car or the pavement, well, probably pretty painful to have their skin ripped off. But I think that's the way we'd handle it in Arkansas. And I would encourage most people anywhere that get stuck behind criminals like this who are trying to block traffic to take matters in their own hands. There's only usually a few of them, and there's a lot of people being inconvenienced. It's time to put an end to this nonsense.
He almost said the word protesters, caught himself and changed it to criminals.
Yes.
So first of all, he's saying that you don't have the right of freedom of speech, like I thought was enshrined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all that, and then advocates that people take into their own hands and do violence to the people who are protesting. That was shocking.
He's advocating mob violence. I know that he didn't have any objection to January 6th assault on the Capitol. So at least he's consistent. He seems to value commuter convenience more than genocide, and he doesn't seem to have read the Constitution, which gives which recognizes the right of the American people to petition their government, to assemble and do so, and to speak freely. And he's an enemy of all three of those freedoms. So I wish he would stay in Arkansas, and the good people of Arkansas who I think are a great deal more decent-minded than he, might give him a correction.
I couldn't believe it when Gary found that clip this morning. When I heard that I actually advocating the blocking and the shutting down of the freedom of speech and the directly, as you put in the Constitution, the right to assemble. And calling them criminals because they inconvenience somebody. And again, of course, turning a blind eye to the people who are innocent men and women and children, especially, who are dying, starving to death in Gaza in use of the bombs that we're providing, and no concern about the human life at all. I just found it shocking.
I suspect he was on the side of Bull Connor back in the civil rights struggle. Civil disobedience is an American tradition. It has helped us become a better country. And the right to petition the government, the right to demonstrate for a policy, even at the inconvenience of the public, is enshrined in our Constitution. And the civil rights struggle made use of that. I guess he would consider Martin Luther King a criminal.
By his definition, that's exactly right. That's I wonder if people are thinking much about that. But anyway, we'll leave it right there for now. Just wanted to point that out there. But we thank you so much for coming on, Mr. Ambassador, and providing such clarity to some really complicated issues here. And we are going to continue to watch this very, very closely, especially in the tense, really days and hours, maybe even to come, as to what Netanyahu will do.
Thanks.
So thanks for coming on. And thank you for joining with us today. Be sure and join us at 1 o'clock this afternoon, where Alex of History Legends fame will be back on our show with a fascinating look at the evolution of the tactical performance of the Russian army from the beginning of the war up through today. And you will be interested in that because it doesn't get covered on the mainstream media. You'll not hear much about it. So if you want to know what's actually happening on the ground and why things are happening the way they are, then you'll want to tune in at 1 o'clock today. Thanks. Be sure and like and subscribe, and we will see you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.